Tonight, the Cohen fallout, and there's lots of it. One day after the bombshell testimony before Congress and the American public, has Trump's former fixer now putting the president in greater legal peril? We're going to put that question to a former U.S. attorney. Then, the politics of what Cohen said and the impact it will have on President Trump. It's a bizarre and potentially dangerous new normal for American politics. Plus, what happens now in Washington? Answers from ABC News political director Rick Klein. And later, it's almost hard to believe that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden could be running for the nomination of the same party, but that's where Democrats are as we begin the race to 2020. Democratic voters and supporters may be worried, but the party doesn't seem to be. We'll get the lay of the land from the communications director for the Democratic National Committee. Even everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A lot to get to in the next 60 minutes. Michael Cohen Week continuing on Capitol Hill today. Now, Donald Trump's former personal attorney and self-anointed fixer and admitted felon, Michael Cohen, back on the Hill for the third straight day. This time, back behind closed doors, testifying in private to the House Intelligence Committee. Also noting he'll be back there come March to finish the testimony. Reportedly, he had a lot to say and a lot of interesting revelations. Now, of course, Washington and the nation still buzzing over what we do know happened, that Cohen's public testimony before the House Oversight Committee just yesterday. Cohen pulling few punches, and he began right from his opening statement.
I am ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience. I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
Tell us how you really feel. Cohen also spoke about the now infamous meeting at the Trump Tower between Donald Trump Jr. and the Russians.
Questions have been raised about whether I know of direct evidence that Mr. Trump or his campaign colluded with Russia. I do not. And I want to be clear, but I have my suspicions. Sometime in the summer of 2017, I read all over the media that there had been a meeting in Trump Tower in June of 2016 involving Don Jr. and others from the campaign with Russians, including a representative of the Russian government, and an email setting up the meeting with the subject line, "Dirt on Hillary Clinton." Something clicked in my mind. I remembered being in a room with Mr. Trump, probably in early June of 2016, when something peculiar happened. Don Trump Jr. came into the room and walked behind his father's desk, which in and of itself was unusual. People didn't just walk behind Mr. Trump's desk to talk to him. And I recall Don Jr. leaning over to his father and speaking in a low voice, which I could clearly hear, and saying, "The meeting is all set." And I remember Mr. Trump saying, "Okay, good, let me know." What struck me as I looked back and thought about the exchange between Don Jr. and his father was first, that Mr. Trump had frequently told me and others that his son Don Jr. had the worst judgment of anyone in the world. And also that Don Jr. would never set up any meeting of significance alone, and certainly not without checking with his father. I also knew that nothing went on in Trump world, especially the campaign, without Mr. Trump's knowledge and approval.
Cohen also seemed to open the door to other possible investigations of the president, from claims of inflated estimates of his personal and business holdings to reduce his tax exposure to even claims of improper use of his personal charities and to payments made to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Even the Trump Tower Russia project that the president lied to the American people about was on the docket.
He lied about it because he never expected to win. He also lied about it because he stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars on the Moscow real estate project. And so I lied about it too, because Mr. Trump had made clear to me through his personal statements to me that we both knew to be false, and through his lies to the country that he wanted me to lie.
Now, we're going to approach Cohen and the aftermath of his testimony from a few different angles tonight. We're going to get to the politics in a minute, but first we start with the legal side. Is Donald Trump in a more precarious place now, thanks to Michael Cohen, than he was yesterday morning? And is it just Mueller has to worry about or something far more? For that, we turn to former federal prosecutor Joe Moreno. He served in the Justice Department's National Security Division. He joins us now. Wow, yesterday, but of all the takeaways, and there were many, at least for me, and if you can give this some context, whatever Mueller comes out with in his report, whether it's limited in scope or not, those are just the beginning of Trump's problems. After yesterday, clearly we get the vibe here that he's got a little problem, and it's in the Southern District of New York. I want to play a soundbite. This from one of the congressmen, Christian Murthy. He was asking if there were other crimes involved, and I thought it was very revealing what Mr. Cohen had to say.
Is there any other wrongdoing or illegal act that you are aware of regarding Donald Trump that we haven't yet discussed today?
Yes, and again, those are part of the investigation that's currently being looked at by the Southern District of New York.
Joe, tomorrow we're going to take a special look at the Southern District of New York, but give an idea to the public at home why the SDNY is going to be such an important player here, how far-ranging they can go, and what we got in terms of a snapshot yesterday as to what they're already involved in.
Sure, Richard, and it's good to be with you. So I think you put your finger right on it. There were 9 hours of testimony yesterday, but that 15-second exchange probably was the most revealing of all in terms of its long-term legal implications, right? So keep in mind, we have the special counsel, who we know full well has spent almost 2 years looking into Russia collusion, possibly obstruction of justice, and technically anything else he can find along the way. And he has brought a lot of prosecutions, a lot of indictments, some guilty pleas, some convictions, some jail sentences even, a lot to show for it. But then separately, it seems that the special counsel has spun off certain portions of his investigation, and a lot of them have gone to the Southern District of New York. Now, that's a completely separate office with a separate United States attorney sitting at the top of it, sitting in New York City. Now, they are particularly known to be an independent, aggressive, and very, very capable office. They have brought major cases against drug kingpins, organized crime figures, Wall Street titans. So they have a long history of being proficient, aggressive, and absolutely independent and free of any kinds of sort of anyone trying to reach in there and manipulate what they're doing. And so many of us thought when Michael Cohen's offices were raided last year, and those offices were in New York, and that was clearly a part of the New York investigation, that was a very significant moment, because unlike the special counsel, who has some parameters around what he can investigate and who he has to go to for permission and who can shut him down, there's really none of those parameters up in New York. They can go anywhere the evidence leads, whether it's taxes, campaign finance violations, bank fraud, anything else. And so that's really the danger, and largely it's an unknown danger. All we learned, though, from yesterday was that clearly the president remains in the crosshairs of the Southern District of New York. Michael Cohen confirmed what we already suspected. That's probably the #1 danger for this White House.
And as you mentioned, in New York, you have things like the Trump Organization headquarters, Trump Foundation, the golf course, so many other moving parts to this. Now, Alan Weisselberg, we heard his name a few times, whether it was breadcrumbs that Cohen was leaving or a roadmap, whatever your choice of euphemism is. Should he basically, Weisselberg, pack his bags and expected to be called as a witness here, or how do they navigate so they don't step on Mueller's toes?
So remember, Alan Weisselberg has been given immunity, which means that you only get that if you have some valuable information and that you're already sharing. So we have to assume full well that he has already been cooperating with investigators at least these past 6 months. So anything he knows, they know. You can also pretty much expect that his name was mentioned so many times yesterday that he will most likely soon be the recipient of a subpoena by either the House or the Senate or both, and will be making his way down here to Washington to testify.
Lucky him. Do you think Mueller learned anything yesterday, or do you think that basically we learned only what he wanted us to learn, given the ongoing nature of the investigation?
Robert Mueller was not going to let Michael Cohen testify to anything yesterday that he wanted to keep secret, either because of the element of surprise or because it would have triggered any kind of notification about future investigative decisions or prosecution decisions. So I have to think that anything Michael Cohen testified about in public was something that Bob Mueller had thought about, talked about, and said, I'm okay with you talking about that. Stay away from these areas, okay to talk about these areas. And in fact, Michael Cohen did say on numerous occasions, those are things I'm not supposed to talk about because they have to do with ongoing investigations. So I don't think anything got out of the bag that Bob Mueller wasn't okay with letting out of the bag.
As a former federal prosecutor, I'm wondering, were there points yesterday where you're like, am I watching a mob trial? I mean, it had loyalty, the protection, talking about speaking in code. I mean, my God, I was waiting for L'Omerta to drop there at a certain point here. Really? I mean, we're talking about the president and his attorney, but it had all the hallmarks of it, didn't it?
Well, the nearest parallel were the discussions Michael Cohen described about inferring the president's desires. So it wasn't like he would get directives or text messages or emails or any kind of statement saying, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. Instead, it was, I want this to be done, and then Michael Cohen and other surrogates perhaps would make sure it got done. And so it was this implied desire to have things happen a certain way, not explicit. And that's very consistent with what we see in organized crime trials, where the heads of organized crime families are very good at not being caught giving explicit instructions to underlings. Instead, it's often through surrogates or through implied instructions, and therefore it's harder to build those cases because oftentimes it's circumstantial evidence. It's not direct evidence. You have to look at the circumstances, you have to look at what actions were done, and whether those individuals were rewarded as a result of doing those things.
Finally, I don't think anyone will confuse what we heard, particularly questioning with Inherit the Wind. In fact, there was one exchange I think sadly was symptomatic of the day.
Liar, liar, pants on fire. No one should ever listen to you.
My God, it was embarrassing. I know this wasn't a court of law, but we've established here, you don't trust Michael Cohen, but there really wasn't a lot of upside for him to lie yesterday. And given how lack of trustworthy he is, he came across as believable, at least to me. How about you?
So I saw the whole thing, Richard. I thought Michael Cohen did very well under the circumstances. I thought the Democrats did fairly well. They hit some good questions. I think they also wasted some good opportunities. The Republicans did horribly. I mean, they really squandered their opportunity. I get that they wanted to rough him up, right? They wanted to make it seem like he was not someone who could be trusted. They could have done that one time and let it go. I think I would have said, you know what, rough him up right off the bat, then either get into the substance of what he is talking about, at least pretend, even if you're not interested, in getting to the merits and saying, I want to understand this or explain a little bit more about that. Otherwise, just don't say anything at all. I mean, but I think they did much more harm. They seemed like they were being overly protective of the president by bashing Michael Cohen so often, and I think he actually, under the circumstances, did pretty well as a result of it.
And I thought it was interesting. They may have gone after him, understandably, albeit repetitively, on the trustworthy, but they didn't defend the president. They just were attacking the witness. And I think, and we'll get into that later on in the program, but I thought that was notable in and of itself. But Joseph, I appreciate you making time as always for us. Thank you.
Sure, Rich. Always a pleasure.
Now, of course, President Trump, potential jeopardy here after the testimony of Cohen isn't just a legal one. At the end of the day, it will be political. So when we come back, what is next for the president and his supporters now? Will Cohen make it harder for Trump to govern? We're going to get into that and more with ABC News political director Rick Klein.